I do her restoration work, hang shows, consult, whatever she needs. I'm speaking for Anita today because her voice is not up to par. Where is Anita? There's Anita, right, sitting on the couch. And so, on behalf of Anita and Ian Shapolsky, there he is. Welcome to the gallery, and hopefully we'll be able to answer questions or elucidate on some of the artwork. Would you like to
Sure.
feel like starting since you're here?
I'm here. Okay, that part's on. Now press the button on the top. And hold that baby. Thanks. I'm Charles Clough. I'm a painter. And I have an agenda. This is my second coming. I'm not Jesus, I'm Charlie. When I say as my second coming, it means I moved to New York in 1978 and ran a career for 20 years, and then I became the Invisible Man. And I have returned to New York, all the while having an apartment in Soho. I returned to New York to thank Anita, who has rediscovered me. Thank you, Anita. Thank you, Anita. I have tried many times to get dealers to give a heck about what I do, and I would give them catalogs that cost me $50 and so on, and they didn't really want them. I think they threw them away, and I found it really upsetting. So the thing is that I'm one of these people that was an artist from when they were a toddler. You know, some of you are, obviously. And for example, at high school, I was tested for a graphic art program, kind of like art and design in New York, only it was in Buffalo. And in high school, I developed a pretty good illustration style. And I went to Pratt, and my mind was blown by New York City. I mean, in Buffalo, we have a great, used to be Albright Knox, now it's Buffalo AKG Art Museum. And so I kind of knew about art, but ABEX and pop seemed like bullshit to me because they're too easy. And in the year that I went to Pratt, the Geldzahler show at the Met, the New York Painting and Sculpture 1945 to 1970 show was up, and it's like, oh, a lot of stuff clicked. Like, I got what was going on with art history. And it occurred to me that I wanted more than to be an illustrator, and I wanted to address these grandiose themes of the absolute, ultimate concern, and so on. And so I dropped out of Pratt and moved back to Buffalo and got a studio with I traded sculptor's assistants for a studio where a rich guy had he used his inheritance to buy a big studio building and a sculpture park south of the city. And I began to do my work by making artwork, but also going to the university and University of Buffalo, Buff State art libraries to read art history. And so I read all the bound periodicals, Art Forum and Art in America and Studio International and Art International and Arts Magazine. And I went to Toronto for a year, went to an art school there, and I found an alternative space in Toronto that was importing artists from New York, visiting artists who would, share. And I took that idea back to the not-for-profit in Buffalo, where I worked, and I started a place called Hall Walls, which I partnered with Robert Longo and Cindy Sherman and other people to make this thing happen. And Hall Walls is celebrating its 50th anniversary right now, and There have been 9,000 artists who have come through. It covered visual art, literature, music, whatever you can think of. Tiddlywinks, big shows on Tiddlywinks. And the thing is, I learned art history in those, reading the bound periodicals, but I learned art of the present by programming Linda Benglis and Richard Serra and Robert Morris and John Borofsky and a laundry list, like hundreds of people whose names you know, and some of them are dead now, and it was a very good thing for me. The thing is that this idea of art history, okay, abstract art then and now, well, that's really relevant. I mean, I was born in 1951 when Pollock was making his best work. The Albright has great art from 1860 on, and growing up with Picasso and Matisse was a good thing. Although as a kid, it didn't mean much to me. It wasn't until I came to New York and got the bigger picture that if you're an artist, you can compete with Michelangelo. What the heck, I mean, pick role models that are challenging. Why not? So the idea with Hall Walls was to launch our careers, and we launched into the pictures generation. My conversation with Longo at that point was, there's something that I call pictureism, and I meant like a grammar and vocabulary of making pictures. Abstract came to me when I was 10 years old, and reading Life magazine, like, what is this crap? I mean, growing up with Norman Rockwell and illustrators and the golden age of illustration, good old-fashioned pictures were what made sense to me. But by growing and learning, I came to know abstraction, and that abstraction is more than representing anecdote, but accessing bigger themes. So when I came to New York, as I say, pictures generation, we hooked up with Helene Weiner at Artist Space, and that's just before she made Metro Pictures with Janelle Rearing, and it launched Longo and Sherman, and I was in the door for a minute, and then the gatekeepers pulled the gates shut, and I was on my own, and I found Pam Adler that I showed with, and then Jack Tilton that I showed with, and then Colin DeLand that I showed with, and Scott Hansen that I showed with, and Collins and Malazzo that I showed with, and I got good reviews. I got, I was in museum shows, and it was good, and then the 90s happened, and the best description of the 90s I found recently is the Columbus Museum did a show 5 years ago or so about the collapse of the art market in the 90s, and how in the rebounding of the art world, identity politics sort of subsumed aesthetics, and the concern for formalism that I had kind of found my way to. I mean, I read all of the Greenberg stuff and the Rosenberg stuff and so on, and then I love Morris Louis and de Kooning and Frankenthaler, and you top 40 from the 50s and 60s. But I was also challenged by conceptual art and earth art and so on in the 60s. And my what I do, I think, is a big mix. I mean, if you historically you look at modernism starting in 1860 with Baudelaire and the Painter of Modern Life, I kind of take it to a different point with when Turner, Turner starts out photorealist, and then photography happens, and Turner goes way painterly. And I sort of focus on that as a key point in relation to my use of photography, for example, and painting. Let's see here. I came up with a job description in 1976 of the photographic epic of a painter as a film or a ghost. And by epic, I was thinking, I hope I live a long time. That happened. I'm 73. I've had 50-some years, doing this stuff. And photographic, well, we learned from conceptual art that documentation is the name of the game. I take a lot of pictures. Last Monday at the Met and Guggenheim, I took 500 pictures. That's kind of par for the course. Times, 50 years, I got a lot of pictures. The painterly, to me, as I say, going to Turner, going back to Poussin and Rubens, there was this French Academy debate about the Poussinistes and the Rubenists, that the Poussinistes were the line people and the Rubenists were the color people. Therein forms this tradition of the painterly, which I think, if you look at Peter's paintings, for example, the play of the actual laying down of the paint holds meaning that's not literary. And I compare it to flavor or aroma. The painterly is a way of thinking that's not literary. So, and then film or a ghost, one of the benefits of Buffalo in the 70s was a media studies department that was run by a guy who simultaneously ran programs at NYU, at Rice in Houston, and at the University of Buffalo. And he brought together Hollis Frampton and Paul Sherris, Woody and Steina Basulka, and Tony Conrad, who are all key members of the independent American cinema. Flicker films. Tony Conrad's Flicker film is one of the classics of Flicker films. Well, I'll get to flickering films soon. But photographic epic of a painter is a film or a ghost. The in the 1969, 70 conceptual art, Duchamp came into the picture in a big way. The conceptual artists pointed to Duchamp as a precursor and a leader in that sense. Looking at Duchamp's career, to me, showed that the oeuvre is the thing. Individual works better be good, but a body of work that corresponds to the life of the artist is really the thing. And I got obsessed with quantities, for example. Okay, Picasso, 150,000 works. Okay, Warhol, 100,000 works. I was just looking at the catalog raisonné of Roy Lichtenstein online, which is a mind fuck, because it's 5,000 works, all available. Flip through Lichtenstein's entire body of work. It's incredible. Okay, I got some numbers. Maybe I'll start this flickering. Sorry to. All right, here we go. Okay, so the last 10 years for me have been a very particular period. 20% of my career. What we have here is 1,123 paintings in 47 seconds. And this is a segment of the photographic epic of a painter as the film goes. And, you know, okay, so 1,100 paintings in 10 years. You know, like, what else is there? There's you know, a total 8,000 paintings, and then there's like uncountable photographs. I mean, the idea of making a lot of work is obviously important to me. I'll also point out that the individual works are really important to me. Each image in there, like for example, this is one of those. They're Clough numbers. Clough is my last name, Clough. My relatives pronounce it rough, tough Clough. There are 80 of me when you look me up. One of them is a stockbroker, billionaire guy in Boston. Another one of them is a fundamentalist preacher, and I abhor dogma, so that's not me. Anyway, there are many of me. Clough. Buffalo, I'm from Buffalo, Clough. You know, sometimes kind of confusion of identity. Speed up.
Yep.
Yeah.
Done. Peter, come on up.
Great. You want to close your computer?
Yeah, thank you.
Very impressive. Thank you, Charles.
Peter.
Thank you. My name is Peter Bonner. Anita's shown 11 paintings, a couple of which are here, I think 3, from upstairs. And they are works I started in 2020 from a new sort of body of work. And so these 11 are from a whole bunch that I've got now, not as many as Charles has made. And it sort of began because I showed a painting in 2019, a large painting that I made in I think I finished it in 2020. Sorry, in 2012. I showed it in 2019 at a gallery, and seeing it again after so much time, I first showed it in 2012, and seeing it again after so much time made me see part of the painting, which was a sort of an abstracted figure, and to see the importance of that shape and that figure. And it sort of reminded me of why I began painting. And it was sort of back, when I knew nothing, I had this sort of goal of wanting of basically putting a figure in a landscape, but really to merge the two, to merge the landscape with the figure. And that's what sort of happened in this large painting. There was like this dialogue between the space and the figure in such a way that this abstract shape resulted, and it had some sort of meaning. And that idea was something that I'd been thinking a lot, and I really first, there's been a couple of moments in my life where that idea really sort of came home to me, and one was when just after I finished being a student, I spent 7 months traveling around Europe and a month in Russia, specifically to see Andrei Rublev's icons. And we visited, my wife and I visited the Sergei-Posov monastery, where there's an iconostasis of Andrei Rublev, with the intention of trying to understand how these weird shapes that you get in Russian icons, how they can be so meaningful to people. I'd always looked at it from an outsider and thought, this shape it's a very interesting shape, but why do pilgrims travel so far and find such meaning in these works? And it wasn't until we were in the room where the iconostasis was, it's like a little chapel, and you had to enter the room through this very heavy velvet sort of curtain, and inside there was this chant, this priest was chanting, and pilgrims were all in there and they were wailing, and the place stunk, and it smelled of flesh and people being present, but also wax, and the only light was from the flicker of candles. And there was this moment where the whole thing came together and the shape made complete sense. And since then I've been sort of trying to, do that in my own work. So what happened in the painting, something I feel like that happened in this painting that I showed in 2019. So in 2020, I began sort of afresh. I started doing a lot of little drawings, but just of placing myself inside the body and making a drawing sort of from the inside out, from that experience. And then they developed, to a point where I started getting pretty interested in this as a way to move forward. And the scale of all these paintings is 16 by 20, and I made a conscious decision to get a size of canvas that basically put me in the same situation as I was when I was drawing, which is basically drawing on my lap. So not drawing, with the work vertical on the wall, but basically drawing on my lap. And something would happen, and then the paintings begin, and they proceed very intuitively. So I don't know what they're going to be. Sometimes they start, they all begin figuratively. The gender's fluid, like sometimes they feel feminine, sometimes they feel masculine, sometimes they're androgynous. So there's no specificity as to one or the other, but then the way they progress, each move I make is seen. So basically I only make a mark if I see it, or a shape. And then they evolve, and what they evolve to be, I sort of hand that over. Like I'm not worried about controlling the outcome, but I'm more concerned about that sort of journey and how that journey progresses, and where it gets to is always sort of interesting. And so that's a little snippet of Anita's 11 paintings that she's chosen to show, and where they're coming from. And then the titles, this is called Nude, and this is called the Mailbox, and this is called Maluccio, and they're all titled either from, something that I felt present with at the time the painting arrived. So it could be some music that I was listening to. So these two are titled after Tom York lyrics, some music I was listening to at the time. And then this just reminded me, this is like to ward off the evil eye, evil spirits. So it's sort of function in that way. But there's some that have sort of astronomical implications, or so they're sort of coming from everywhere, the resulting images. But I feel very, very excited about what I'm doing, because I do feel that there is this coming together for the first time between landscape and the body. But not what I was trying to do initially, which was to put a figure in a space. Now I'm putting myself in the space as the paintings sort of evolve, and as I'm sort of working in that space, things start to get a sense of rightness and progress forward until there's some sort of result. And there's some more upstairs if you want to go and have a look up there as well. So ask some questions if you want.
What inspired you to use the sand for the three?
So the sand,
Is it sand? It's sand.
the sand sort of happened by accident a few years ago. I was in Byron Bay, sort of the night before we were going to be traveling to Sydney to see a friend to give him a work. It was for his 50th, and I'd been working on this work for maybe 2 years. And it's kept getting worse and worse and worse and worse and worse, and it was a photo of him fishing, like he's loves fishing, and so I'm trying to make this work of him fishing, and I made a watercolor, but that became a painting, that became a collage. It just kept going round and round and round, just getting and so finally, and this was being made in New York, and finally I was like, the thing that's missing is sort of the feeling of being present on the beach with him fishing. So what I'm going to do is make this on the beach while we're in Australia before I see him. And so of course left it to the last minute to do so. And I went out on the beach. I thought I'm going to make the paintings. It'd be great, and it went really, really badly. And so I got pissed off and just threw some sand on it and went off. And then when I came back, the fluid pigment had just moved through the sand, and the whole thing just locked in. It was perfect. And so I gave it to him, and he loves it. But what I realized is having some way of introducing something that takes you out of the painting and lets something else happen is a good thing. So I started doing it here. But it also, what it gives me is texture, like another way to make relationships, another sort of bunch of attributes to relate in the work. And often there's pieces of collage in the works, and as you can see, there's charcoal, and you know, there's that blue is ink, it's not paint. So there's, you know, in pastel paint, there's ink, there'd be charcoal, they get scratched into. So the tools I use to scratch through them or to hack into them, because they get very thick, sometimes they go through the canvas, and the canvas sort of shreds, and I've got to repair, I've got to, you know, deal with this sort of collapsed painting, which I realize gives me the opportunity to sort of do something. It's not like repairing the painting, but I'm basically working behind and at the front at the same time. And so something else happens to the space when that happens. So I sort of feel excited when they get wrecked, but if I do it intensely, it's no good. So it's sort of the way the decisions happen is paramount. Like it's sort of, I've got to see what needs to be done versus, you know, think what's got to be done. Robert, you raised your hand. Yes.
I have a question. I'm interested in hearing about color for you and where you started with color and how your relationship with color has changed over time in the process of doing the work.
Yeah, so initially when I started work, it was mainly drawing. So I got obsessed with drawing. And then my first effort to really understand color was sort of linked to tone and temperature. And then, then I really dived in, and it became like a chromatic palette that I was dealing with, so like an impressionist palette. And now it's just very intuitive, and I think I'm thinking more about light. The light and the feeling of the space is what's driving my color decisions, but it's not. I'm not theoretical about it anymore. So it's just very intuitive, and color has the potential to reorganize everything. Like if there's moments, say for example, there's one upstairs, Andromeda, where this blue went in right at the end, and often in the studio, my studio is just everything's flat on the floor, and so there's nothing that I'm there's not one painting that I'm working on at any one point in time. There's just everything's out that's sort of fair game to work on. And what I find happens is that things jump out to me and say, do this and do that, so they speak. And this painting I'd been working on for some time, and it spoke, and a particular sort of blue had to go in. And when it happens, I find I know exactly how to mix that blue. Like it's not like a blue. It's not a general feeling. It's a very specific feeling, and I'll have the formula in my head, and I know I've got to get this and that and a little bit of this, and so I can pretty much mix it up straight away. And then it goes on, and when it went on, the whole thing reorganized and it sort of came alive. And that's sort of, there's a lot of faith in that, and that sort of moment where the introduction of one color completely produces a painting I had never seen before anyway. Like I wasn't envisaging it, but it sort of happens, and then my job's really to recognize that something's just happened. Very good question, Jane.
Yeah.
Will you ever make bigger paintings than the standard size that you're showing here?
So I've started to make some large ones. But that connection that I begin with, where I'm drawing at this scale, and so those drawings all happen in the middle of the night, like during the pandemic, and so that like we all do, we wake up in the middle of the night, but instead of like looking at my phone or something, I would just go out and draw until I got tired again and then go back to sleep. And so I ended up with a lot of drawings. But also, I wouldn't turn the light on, so I didn't know exactly what I was drawing. So sort of drawing in the dark, which is sort of how I feel I make, the big issue then was how do I make these paintings in the studio when it's not dark? So making that transition, where I felt there was a connection when the lights were out, but the first efforts in the studio, I didn't feel that connection. And so now I feel like I have the connection, but can I keep the connection and go larger is the question. So hopefully you'll see soon. Yeah.
I do have a question. So I know you spend a lot of time in the Sonoran Desert drawing. Is that environment, that special light and the texture of the sand and that, does that also still influence you?
Yeah, I mean that's been incredibly important. The Sonoran Desert and the Central Australian Desert, and in the Sonoran Desert, I tried every which way to sort of make something that I felt captured something about the desert, and they're all sort of larger works that I'd come up with ways to do in the desert. And the work that really I think got to it was a small little painting that had nothing to do with the desert. It was in my studio. And one day I was mixing a color for another painting, and I had this feeling that I had to go and find this panel and put this color on this panel, like sort of repaint that panel with this color, not knowing why or what it would be. And when I did, the whole thing became the Sonoran Desert. And it wasn't like an image that you could see in the Sonoran Desert, it was just a painting that felt like the Sonoran Desert. And so that distillation of experience into some sort of image sort of first happened through painting at the Sonoran Desert. So it's very important. And still, like, I've just moved places up to the Bronx, and the studio, so I've built a new studio there, and the floor I've just remade, and I've painted the floor, or we've just finished the floor, and it's the color of the dirt in the desert. So I'm sort of thinking about it a lot, yeah.
I think right now it's time for Joe to come on.
Joe.
Thank you.
Very good.
As I said, I've been working with Anita for a number of years at this point. I do all her restoration work. We can talk about. I'm quite familiar with all of this grouping of artists. Anita primarily represents a wide range of artists from the 40s, 50s, 60s, mainly abstract expressionists. This is in the hallway coming in, Jean Renel, who made mosaics, trained in Europe, and then came to the United States and had quite a long career. Stanley Hayter here, who was a very, very famous printmaker. All of the abstract expressionists worked in his atelier in New York and in Paris. So these are incredibly rare paintings of his. Taro Yamamoto studied with Hans Hofmann, obviously, a huge influence. Hofmann's famous, push-pull setting, creating a ground and then geometric bright colors to create this extremely non-naturalistic space. They're completely plastic and painterly and have absolutely nothing to do with nature. Who else? Seymour Boardman. We have quite a few pieces. Another major abstract expressionist. That's a particularly great piece. Here's another. I have a rather intimate relationship with most of the work because as a restorer, I could probably answer more questions about the work from the inside out than from a historical perspective. Although we can talk about that too. If anyone has any questions, we also have Amy Ernst here on this wall. Amy's grandfather was Max Ernst. Her father was Jimmy Ernst. Amy, I think, is in Florida right now, but I've known her for quite a number of years. Her work goes through periods of, she's all over the place. She's really, but very interesting. Who else? Bert Hassan. There's a print on this wall. Bert was primarily a printmaker influenced by surrealism, and then later in his career completely went in a completely different direction and started making geometric pieces that had nothing to do with figures. Interesting artist. I can maybe, provide information if anyone has questions regarding any of these artists in terms of, how the work was constructed.
Was this the red one?
This.
Yeah.
Let me just move this a second. Okay, this is another Boardman, as this piece back here. Interesting career. Early pieces, this is very early. Earlier pieces tend to be more subdued and not nearly as colorful. His later work was just far more colorful. And then late in his career, he became almost a geometric abstract painter. The work looked a lot more like Clifford Still, which is really hard to imagine when you see this. But these paintings are quite interesting. Very, very fragile materials. The canvas is generally extremely thin. The paint application is very thin, and with age tends to dry out, wants to fall off the canvas. They require a lot of attention. But Anita's has been a champion of work like this for a long time when it was not quite so popular. But she has quite a collection. So if there are any, yes.
I'm interested in the work of a restorer. I'm not quite sure exactly what that is, but I'm imagining that in some ways it's kind of like being a translator, and you're trying to take the work back to its original state in the present, and at the same time, there's a natural process of the aging of the work that maybe you want to respect as well.
Correct. It's almost like the Hippocratic oath. You first do no harm. It's like you want to be. I tend to be extremely conservative in I want to add as little as possible, but if there are, large tears or missing paint or something like that, it's, I try not to add much of myself if I can get away with it. sometimes it's not really possible, but I do, I mean, I make paint. I have a corbeille in my studio now, from, 1821. So, with these paintings, for the most part, are in pretty good condition, but there are problems. They're difficult to clean. You don't want to, and particularly with abstract expressionism, the artists at the time were combining materials that were not user friendly. You can't, you see paintings that have enamel, oil, gouache, sometimes, from the early 50s, you have early versions of acrylic. They mix them all together. You don't want to do that because they don't actually mix. You end up with layers of things that dry at different times. They start to peel, they crack. Some of them actually, I've seen paintings where these are different, these are modern. The materials are fine, but when in the 50s, if you were painting using enamel, acrylic and oil all in the same piece, they were going to dry at different rates. Sometimes whole sections would literally slide off. Or like Pollock, even at MoMA, there is a crew that comes by in the evenings after the visitors have gone, and they have little forensic baggies, and they go to the Pollocks and they pick things off the floor, put them in bags, and the restorers, if it's possible, they'll put it back periodically. I mean, because they just fall apart.
Wow.
Or things like the Mondrians. A lot of small pieces were painted on cardboard with tape, with masking tape. And if you have the opportunity to go up and look at them at close range, it's kind of remarkable that they exist at all, because it really is just masking tape and some tempera on a piece of cardboard. It's just, don't touch it. Don't breathe on it. Don't look at it. They're a lot of work is just a nightmare. It particularly works from the 30s, 40s, 50s. It's kind of a nightmare for to do restoration work. So you never know.
I was at Sotheby's once, and there was a de Kooning painting on newspaper.
Yes, he painted a lot on newspaper. Actually, most of his, I think people would be surprised, a great many of his paintings were originally done on newspaper that he would then glue to the canvas.
And this one was, you could see
that it
just
was
how
actual,
broken it was,
that it was still typeface, and he actually used that at one point.
The paper is full of acid, so it's not going to survive.
Well, they're not, and that wasn't archival. That's another problem with a lot of abstract expressionist work, is not just the paint, but paperwork. They were using butcher paper.
Yeah.
I mean, no one could afford quality materials. They worked with what they had, and
So
consequently.
there were two Sotheby's employees nearby me writing things down in front of each work, and I asked them what they were doing, and they said they're doing condition reports prior to the auction. And I said, have you done this one yet? And they said, yeah. And I said, well, what was the condition? They said, excellent.
Well, I mean, that's, absolutely true,
Yeah.
but
Exactly.
I see a lot of work
It definitely wasn't excellent.
before it goes to, I've been in the back rooms at Sotheby's and Christie's, and they're uncrating things, and it's like, oh, don't, put the top back on the crate, because this is not gonna be ready for the auction 3 months from now. It's gonna take more time. But you never know what you're going to run into. But with paperwork particularly, non-archival paper, you know, discoloration. The paper, the less fabric content in the paper, it dries out. It actually, you can try to rehydrate it, which is always a bad idea.
Wow.
That costs a lot of money and takes an enormous amount of time with trays full of, you know, liquid materials that, you know, and hopefully you don't destroy the image. Or, you know, prints, trying to, just to repair something like flocking on the outside of a print where it's discolored, but, you know, you have to be careful because you don't want to melt any of the ink, or something like that. It's just, you know, I don't like to do paperwork, so, personally. It's just, it takes up way too much space and it's too labor intensive, and most people, even the museums don't. You know, they usually do that in-house. There aren't a lot of paper restorers. It's a good
Joe?
job. It's a good job if someone wants it.
Anita asked if you could talk about Mark Gibeon a little bit.
Oh, Mark. Well, people would have to go upstairs for that.
Discuss the metal he uses.
That's a good question. Well, I hope everyone goes upstairs to see more of this work. Mark Gibeon is a sculptor who primarily uses plexiglass, molded glass, brass, bronze, all kinds of welded materials. There's even a chair upstairs that looks like something from the Game of Thrones. But he makes pieces that are meant to cantilever off the wall, coming out into space. They're very interesting. Anita, anything specific?
No, I may go up those things.
Okay, yeah, it's better to see than to try and explain it, because you have to see the material, how he uses the materials. I'm not a sculpture expert by any means, but I can answer any questions that someone might have regarding any of these paintings.
How did you become a restorer?
By necessity. I actually paint frescoes, portable frescoes. And just the necessity of inventing a way to use those materials so they don't crack and fall off the canvas. I mean, I make my own paint, I make my materials. So doing restoration, I mean, I make paint. I can make 15th century paint that would, you know, stand up to any analysis. You really can't put new materials on old paintings. It just doesn't work. And most of the auction houses or collectors will go over pieces with a black light, ultraviolet, because any repairs, any new paint just glows. I mean, you know, they know that you have to disclose the kind of work that's been done, or not, depending on how ethical one is. But any questions?
I was gonna say, at this point, we're gonna have a reception with wine, cheese, cakes, and we could talk to the artist and the people here that you wanna talk to in person.
Go walk around.
In person.
And please
All right.
walk around the gallery.
Okay, thanks, Andy.
Oh, hold on. That's right. Yeah. Not with Frank or Peter. I mean, I've only taken Peter's class. Yeah, in the evening. You worked in the film business? That's right. I remember you. Yes. Yeah. But that was like a couple of years ago. And then I saw you again briefly. I mean, I haven't been painting the lead for about a year. I'm gonna go back in January. I was doing a TA thing in the evening, so I had obligations.